Let's talk about the Nikon ZR and the dynamic range. There's a lot of chatter online, on Facebook groups, and so on. So I thought I would stress test the camera in a real world situation so that we can evaluate ourselves. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I shot, how I exposed straight out of the camera. You're going to see that in log. And then I'm going to show you what happens when I apply the red IPP2 LUT, converting it back to Rec.709. And we're going to finish off with adding my own Q Sidney Tone on top of that LUT to take a little bit of that digital edge off. Not that it has a lot, but some. And if the noise is something that you can live with and you think it's okay, then you don't need to denoise. But if you choose to denoise, I'll show you what that image would look like, again, in this stressed out situation. Let's start by taking a look at the actual clip. This was recorded in Red RAW R3D. I'll walk you through the key settings and what I learned from the footage. I'm decoding in full res premium, using clip information for decode quality. Color space is RedWideGamutRGB, and the gamma curve is Log3G10. I shot this at ISO 800. The output tone map is set to medium and highlight roll-off is set to very soft. I made slight adjustments to color temperature, tint, and exposure in raw controls. Now let's take a look at the nodes that I used. Because people love to ask, what did I use to shoot this with? I used the Blazar 33mm anamorphic lens. I used the OC 7-inch monitor to de-squeeze, check false color, and then also check my focus peaking, because when you're shooting R3D, at least as of today, on the Nikon or Nikon ZR, you don't have peaking. So those are the tools that I used. I did use a monopod, and that is probably why some of the image is a little shaky. But there you have it. Those are the tools I used. I'm turning on false color so that you can see the exposure values. Let's make this full screen. It's easier to follow. Even as the clouds move and the exposure shifted slightly, you'll notice something important. Nothing clips. Not even the specular highlights on the glass or on paint. Over the next 10 to 12 minutes that I was out there, exposure fluctuated, but the highlights stayed intact. We came close to losing detail in the deepest shadows, but never in the highlights, and that's a critical distinction. Now I'll leave false color on and enable the LUT. Immediately, you see that the image gets closer to clipping. My next node focuses on cleaning up the blacks. Then I apply Q Sidney Tone, which refines midtone contrast and gently rolls off highlights. Watch how this affects the image. Still no clipping, but the tones look more balanced, more cinematic, and I would say less harsh. I want to jump in for a second and then now talk a little bit about these lab tests that we've seen that pop up online, particularly from Sidney D and Gerald Undant. Of course, the Nikon ZR, based off of the way that these people test, is showing a dynamic range of, really modest, like 10 stops, 10.1 stops. And here's what I have to say about this. The Xyla 21 gives us a good reference as to how much light the sensor is able to receive. The software test, which, again, they do it because they test so many different cameras, and this is a good way for them to have a baseline and a comparison from one to another in the way that they do these tests. But what that software is actually designed to do is not the way that they're using it on YouTube and social media. That software test is designed for manufacturers, the people that are making the cameras, the people that are making the sensors, as a way of calibrating their sensors. In other words, making sure that if they have 5,000 sensors, that all 5,000 are within this margin of error. Not because you're not able to capture a great image out of any one of these sensors. It's just a way for the manufacturer, the company itself, Nikon, Canon, Red, I guess Red would be Nikon these days, Panasonic, and so on, all these different brands, to actually have their own set of tolerances within the sensor development. Now let's jump back and look at my version of a stress test. Here's how the scene looked on set. One quick note, through HDMI, the camera does not output view assist. I also didn't load a LUT on my external monitor. So what you're seeing here is essentially what I was seeing on the back of the camera. Back to the grade. My cleaner blacks node helps remove any unwanted saturation in the darkest areas, like the inside of a window frame or under the streetlights. That prevents color polluted shadows, which is something I try to avoid. Now, when I turn Q Sidney Tone back on, you'll notice it changes how the shadows and the midtones roll off. It takes that digital edge off the image, which is exactly what I want. When I stack both the Rec.709 LUT and Q Sidney Tone, you'll start to see a touch of noise in the midtones, especially around the spicy pie building. That's expected, and it's what we'll talk about next. If I add the denoiser as the first node, most of that texture disappears instantly, so the image becomes extremely clean, maybe even too clean. Here's the shot as recorded. Notice the detail along the shadow side. This is the area opposite of the sun. The sun, which was just out of frame near the Fargo housing sign. As clouds passed, exposure shifted, but the log footage stayed remarkably clean. No visible noise, no crushed blacks. I was shooting at T4 and my ND filters were maxed out to protect the sky. When we applied the red IPP2 LUT to bring back to Rec.709 space, the image still looks balanced. The darker wall in the spicy pie building, that's my shadow reference. Any fill light that you see here is purely from reflections of surrounding structures, mainly brick and glass. I'm retaining detail everywhere, from highlights in the sky to subtle reflections of window glass on walls. Nothing clipped and nothing is artificially crushed. As brightness increases later in the clip, we start to see a little noise in those midtones again, completely normal and not distracting. Once this is uploaded to YouTube, the compressor alone will mask most of this. You only really notice it when you pause or pixel peep. Even then, to me, I would say it's acceptable. This level of texture actually feels organic, especially for streaming or broadcast work. Now let's compare Rec.709 versus Q Sidney Tone. You'll notice Q Sidney Tone renders midtones with a gentler curve, giving more perceived depth between middle gray, shadows, and highlights. This is what makes it feel cinematic rather than clinical. It's subtle, but that's the magic. It gives the image roundness and depth. And the beauty is, this LUT works universally. Drop Q Sidney Tone on top of any baked-in look, and as long as your base exposure is solid, it'll make your footage more pleasing, assuming your taste leans towards mine. As exposure peaks near the end of the clip, some color noise appears, particularly from the interaction between the red IPP2 LUT and Q Sidney Tone, since both are manipulating tonal transitions between middle gray and highlights. If I enable denoising again, the entire frame cleans up nicely. Shadows tighten, edges sharpen. But now, to my eye, it looks too digital, almost sterile. It loses that cinematic texture. So for me, I'd skip denoising on the Nikon ZR. A bit of grain actually helps keep the image natural. This is why I don't fully agree with many of the online tests. Real-world shooting tells a different story. Grain isn't the enemy. Texture is character. So now that you had the opportunity to see the log version, the Rec.709 version, the Q Sidney Tone version, and the denoised version, would you be comfortable just converting to Rec.709 and uploading or sending your finished project that way? Or would you have to denoise? I'm curious. And were you impressed to see the highlight roll-off and the fact that we did not clip any of the highlights or crush any of the shadows? I'm going to tell you, I was. I know for a fact that I will never shoot in a situation that is more harsh or more difficult than that. So to me, I'm impressed. I don't think I need any lab test to tell me how much dynamic range this camera has, because what it can offer, what it can deliver in the way that I shoot, it delivered. It worked. And it worked well in a tiny, tiny package. I'm curious about what you guys think. Let me know in the comments, and I will catch up with you all in the next video. Take care.